Today's Mercedes-Benz interview of the day brought to you by the boundlessly capable all-electric EQS SUV from Mercedes-Benz. The vehicle all-electric, the feeling is all Mercedes. Learn more at MBUSA.com/EQS-SUV. More phone calls on the way. Louis Riddick of the Mothership has been to most of the pro days of the quarterbacks. He'll join us coming up in an hour from now. Joining us now, the former Big Ten MVP, 8th overall pick by the Pacers in 1982, and now the lead basketball analyst for CBS, Clark Kellogg. Clark, good to have you back. Are you an ordained minister?
I am not. I'm an ambassador for God through Christ by the grace of God's goodness. But no, I am not an ordained minister,
Okay.
but I feel a responsibility to live out and walk out my faith the best I can on a daily basis.
All right. I, for some reason, thought you were ordained minister there. But
No.
Don, do you ever have to, tell Charles on the set to, clean it up a little bit?
No, I don't have to tell him that. I just kind of look over there at him, and he kind of knows if he stepped outside of the lines. But I'm going to accept him with love and grace, regardless of when he colors outside of the lines, as we are all inclined to do, Dan, me included, bro.
What kind of relationship did you and Charles have when you guys were playing?
You know what? He came into the league in '84, and he tells the story all the time that I was one of the guys that he kind of looked at as a model for his game. Me and Adrian Dantley and John Drew. Back in the early '80s, I was kind of a combo forward because I was physical enough to play inside, rebounded well, and was skilled enough to play outside. And there weren't a ton of those guys around as I was coming out. And I think Charles kind of looked at us as guys that he could model his game after. So he's always had a level of respect for my game. And then as we competed, he was a monster. I only played a few years in the league because of knee trouble, but I can recall specifically, Dan, getting the best of him in our first meeting when he was with the Sixers. And we somehow had to play them within a week or two of that meeting. And he was looking for me. He was looking for me. I mean, he was wanting to go at me like he hadn't gone at anybody else, he told me. And I felt it. I felt every bit of his potential greatness. And that would have been the season of '84, '85. Then I started to have my knee trouble, so I never got a chance to go at him as I was trajecting upward and he was starting to move towards his Hall of Fame career. And then we've established a mutual friendship and relationship around what we do as analysts now.
And I try to tell people about Dr. J that, those who didn't see him in the ABA, by the time he got to the NBA, I mean, he was still great, but he wasn't Dr. J in the ABA.
Right.
What was that like when you crossed paths with Dr. J?
Any of those guys, George McGinnis, the late George McGinnis, who was a dear friend of mine and was one of the great players in basketball history, had his heyday in the ABA and some of it in the NBA. And I remember watching him and being in training camp with George, and I'm just like, my jaw is dropping. I mean, I'm on a bus with Big Mac. Felt the same way my rookie year, '82, '83, when first playing against the Sixers. We played them in an exhibition game in Cincinnati, ironically, and got a chance to be on the court with him. And that team ended up winning the NBA title, that '82, '83 Sixers team, and then played them 3 or 4 times. And just marveling at guys that I watched and looked up to, and now I'm out there trying to earn my way and show that I belong. I mean, that was kind of my mindset. He's a legend. I get great respect, but I'm here, and I want to kind of make my mark.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I tried to approach it.
Talking to Clark Kellogg, he's the lead college basketball analyst for CBS. Does UConn have anything that makes them vulnerable?
I don't think so, Dan. I mean, I know it's kind of boring, but the reality is they've got the greatest margin of error in the field. I think teams can push them. I think Illinois will push them because of Terrence Shannon Jr., Dane Deja, the versatility of Coleman Hawkins. I think they have the ability to continue to score and keep pressure on UConn and make it tough for them in a 3 or 4 minute last game stretch. You got to have that, but really they've got size. They can play fast. They can play slow. They rebound. They defend at a high level. They're extremely committed to this quest to repeat. I just don't see a chink in their armor. And yet we know in a one-game scenario, If you got to have firepower, though, Dan. I don't think you're going to beat them in a game in the 60s. I think you've got to be able to score the ball consistently so you keep some pressure on them, and then hopefully get them into a game pressure situation where it's a 1-2 possession game. It's 3 minutes to go, and now let's see if they're ready to rise to the level they'll need to in that situation. But their average margin of victory in the 9 tournament wins they've had, as you well know, is 23 points a game. And that means they've not encountered any type of game pressure. Games have been decided against UConn really early in the 40-minute stretch.
What surprised you last night?
The ability of Alabama to show up again defensively, the way they did against Grand Canyon late in that game. Grand Canyon had taken a lead, and then Alabama closed it out on the strength of its defense.
And they're known as an offensive team.
They are an offensive team. I mean, they averaged 91 points a game, and they got to 89 last night, but it was the defense that won the game. I mean, they held Carolina to 25% shooting in the second half, and came up with big stops when they needed them, and their offensive firepower was on display too. Grant Nelson, Aaron Estrada, certainly Mark Sears has been phenomenal. Rylan Griffin was terrific. But defensively is how they won that game. Carolina missed some shots in the second half, but 70% of the shots that they missed were because of really good defense, I thought.
Is it just an aberration that we have big men? You know, Zach Edey, you got Burns at North Carolina State, Clinton at Connecticut. Is it? This isn't normal, though, that you have it, right?
Yeah, the last few years, though, Dan, last couple of years, I think some of it is NIL related because some of these guys, not DJ Burns, who's really phenomenal to watch. I mean, he's such an anomaly.
No, he froze up. A very dramatic pause. All right, we'll see if we can reconnect with Clark. Yeah, but you have the big men. I mean, Zach Edey is still fascinating because he's sort of like Yao Ming with the size that he has over everybody else. I mean, he's just – people don't realize how big Yao Ming is. Even when I think he and Shaq went in at the same time for the Hall of Fame, and Shaq is the biggest guy I've ever seen, and then all of a sudden you see Yao Ming, and it reminds you, no, that's the biggest man I've ever seen. And Edey, compared to everybody else, is just bigger than everybody else. And it feels like considerably larger than them. But he does have some decent footwork and a decent touch there. And I don't know where he's going to go in the draft. But Klingon will be drafted before Zach Edey. I think most of your mocks have him, the Connecticut center, going before Edey. In fact, I don't even know if Edey's a first-round draft pick in some of these mock drafts. Yes, Marv.
Do you think you'll see less one-and-dones and more guys that stay 2 and 3 years if they're maybe a late lottery or maybe late first round, early second round pick? Just because of the NIL, they're a starter on North Carolina or Kansas or whatever, and they don't have to leave for the NBA for economic reasons.
But I don't know how much money is available for a basketball player as opposed to a marquee football player. You know, how much is Zach Edey making? $1 million, maybe? If Purdue had, the player of the year in college football was a Purdue quarterback, how much would he make? He'd make considerably more than what Zach Edey would make. I would just think, based on the sport itself, how much money you bring in, how much money you're willing to spend for that talent. Like, how much did Zion get at Duke? I know it wasn't, NIL money, but is he a $2 million, $3 million? What if Zion was coming out of high school now? What would he get by, any school that wanted to bring him in? Because you can pay him whatever you want. It's not going to be under the table. Is he a $5 million? Your games are on. Every one of those games was on national TV. And feels like, he would be one of those guys who could command that. Yeah, Paul.
So, for example, I look back at Zach Edey, and they estimate he makes about $1 million in NIL money. If, let's say, he was the first pick of the second round of the NBA draft, which I found some mock drafts that had him high second round, he would have made like $1.4 million as a second round pick. So he could have been coming off the bench for the Hawks, making $1.4 million, or take NIL at Purdue and be the star. He'll probably go the same exact place in the draft, but he got to play for Purdue and be a star for one more year because he will probably never be a focal point of a team again.
Yeah, but I don't know if you said I could go into the NBA as a second round pick and make 1.4, or I could stay at Purdue for 1 million and stay an extra year and I'm a marquee player, I'd rather get into the NBA, get into my rookie contract. If I think I'm going to be staying in the NBA for a while, now I get the next contract. That's when I get the real money there. Clark joining us via the phone. Yeah, froze up there, Clark. I thought it was a dramatic pause by you with my question. Then I realized it wasn't. The shot clock expired on you. So,
glad we can restart it, though. Okay,
so the big man, I was just talking about Zach Edey. I don't know how. No. I know he's the player of the year. I don't know. How does that translate to the NBA, in your opinion?
That's a great question. We were just Charles and Kenny and I were just talking about that very point. Years ago, first team All-America, player of the year in college, guaranteed you draft status in the NBA. It was a totally different time and period, different kind of game and players. Now, Zach, to me, certainly warrants a chance in the NBA. I think he's made great improvement. Stay on the roster. I think he's worthy of probably a late first round or second round pick. It doesn't assure you of NBA draft status in this day and age, especially if you're a big guy, because the game has changed so much as it relates to big guys. Big guys now are handling the ball and shooting threes and mobile defensively, so they can switch and guard 1 through 5, at least for periods of a shot clock. So it's a different type of game now with the three-point shooting and the versatility of the big guys athletically. So it'll be an interesting case study to see what happens with Zach and some of the other big guys. Armando Bacot is another big guy. Yeah. Omar Ballo at Arizona. I mean, how will those guys fare, if at all, come NBA time?
You got NC State, Marquette, Gonzaga, Purdue, Duke, Houston, Creighton, Tennessee. Where do you see a surprise?
Potentially NC State, Marquette, just because they're on this magical ride, Dan. And they've got a unique player in DJ Burns Jr. A couple of their role players have really stepped up, Middlebrooks and Diarra. And then DJ Horn is kind of the heart and soul of that team from a point guard standpoint. And Marquette relies so much on turning you over. If you take care of the ball, you typically are going to get shots. And they're not an overwhelming physical team. The Golden Eagles. Tyler Kolek's been great, but I think the potential for the surprise is there first, and then perhaps Duke Houston, because if Duke shows the kind of competitive fight and spirit they showed against James Madison, now you're going up a weight class in Houston because that's who they are. They really are just relentless in the physicality they play with. But Duke showed they've got some of that too, and if they can take it to another level, that could be the other potential surprise. I think Purdue and Gonzaga is a rematch and somewhat of a pick-em, although I've got Purdue moving on in that one. And then the Creighton-Tennessee game, again, really closely matched teams. I like Creighton in that one because of the consistent offensive firepower they've shown.
Before I let you go, Kentucky and John Calipari are going to give it another go here. Is it as simple as I'm going to go to the transfer portal? I don't have to bring in, the top high school kids. Now I can sprinkle in a couple of guys who have been around for 2 years or 3 years?
That's the landscape, but I don't think it's as simple as that. I mean, there's some other adjustments you make, but clearly your roster constitution is a big part in the driving lifeblood of college basketball and college sports. I mean, how you recruit and then how you coach them up. So I think John has to make some adjustments there, which he will. And I'm glad to see it. It'll be an interesting story to keep an eye on going into next season, how the Wildcats move forward in the 24-25.
Thanks for joining us as always. We'll be watching tonight. Thank you, Clark.
My pleasure, Dan. Always good to be with you, man. Enjoy your Friday, your Good Friday, and your weekend.
That's Clark Kellogg, CBS Sports lead college basketball analyst.